Hey guys, welcome to the Game Dev Discussion, the official podcast of the Dynasty Empire. Today we have Quixel texture artist and film texture artist on John Wick and Aquaman, James Lucas. How are you doing, dude?
Hey man. Good. How you going?
I'm good. Thank you for coming on. I know we're completely opposite ends, you being down under and me being in the UK, so timing's a bit difficult.
That's so good.
Fresh off the back of doing a panel with DreamWorks, how'd that go, dude?
Yeah, it was really good. There was a lot of really interesting people on the panel with me. Basically, educators, majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking to a bunch of people who don't necessarily know what's involved in the industry. So it was really nice to sort of give them some insight on how the industry works and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was great.
Any good questions for them? Like, I can imagine if you're talking to someone, there's a bit of an entry level in terms of the conversation when you talk 3D and art. So it can be you can't be in a conversation without knowing what normal maps are and all this sort of stuff. Did they give any good questions, being completely ignorant to this sort of the game art world?
Yeah, there was a few. I mean, I think for me, I sort of found it a bit difficult to try and explain what I do to people who have no idea.
Yeah.
Whereas the other people on the panel with me who were teachers, they were really, really good at that. So they would jump in every now and then and be like, "So can you explain what that is?" And or they would sort of jump in and sort of clarify what I mean by, say, procedural. Like, how do I explain what proceduralism is to someone who doesn't really use computers or doesn't it was a bit difficult. But there was a lot of interest with the breakdowns and stuff for John Wick.
Mm-hmm.
There was people going, "Oh, so why do you have that grid pattern on the road there," and things like that. And so I sort of had to explain, it's a 3D mesh and this is, what we did to get that. And so there was a bit of interest on sort of the background parts of how these things are made, but there's aside from that, there was a lot of sort of questions about what's the weirdest thing you've had to recreate in 3D and all that kind of stuff,
which is
for me, there wasn't much, I don't think, for me personally, but I mean, you're doing things like replacing, some of the character artists there at Method were replacing John Wick's finger, for example, because he got it cut off. And so there's this stump that's been healing for a few weeks. And, they've had to look up references of, amputated limbs, for example, to sort of see what it looks like when it starts healing and all that kind of stuff. So it was, I guess, more weird for them. I thought it was really, really cool because I'm into that kind of stuff. But yeah. So but outside of that, for me, I wouldn't say there was too much that was weird. But yeah, and I mean, outside of that, at the panel, there was students there as well. So after the panel, because I find a lot of people, they're a bit too shy, I guess, to sort of speak up in front of everyone about their questions. They might think it's a silly question or whatever. So I had a lot of people come up to me after the panel to sort of ask questions and sort of go in a bit further of how I got where I am and if I have any suggestions. And there was a couple of people that came up to me and "Oh, I know your work, man," and I've had that once before of one person, and it's a really, really weird feeling, I think, to me, to know that there's students out there that have seen your work and they're trying to learn from what you do or match what you do and things like that. It was a really, really, really bizarre feeling because to me it's I'm still that person who looks up to, the
Yes.
Josh Lynch's and, so to have that is really, really bizarre. But it was great. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, it's terrifying because one of my friends is a uni lecturer, and he inboxed me like, "Oh, by the way, your snow scene, like one of the students referenced it when they were like doing a presentation." And I was like, in my head, all I could think of is, "Don't reference mine shit. That is better ones than me. Go find someone else." But you talked about the film, so I'm really curious about this. Okay, so let's start with the beginning. Like, how did you find yourself in films? Because, you know, when you think of substance design and materials, which I remember when I first came across you, it was that ZBrush / substance designer material with the schools and the wall and stuff. That was my first, like, when I was first made aware of you. I never connected the dots of that leading into film. So how did you get into the film side of stuff?
I still think it was an accident. I was studying game art. It's sort of what I wanted to do, but coming out of college, you know, I had a bit of a portfolio. Some pieces were, you know, okay. Some parts weren't too good. But I got contacted by Method Studios on LinkedIn by the recruiter there. So I just had an interview, and like the one thing I would say is for them, it's a model and texture artist position. Usually, like at least the Melbourne studio. I know like the Canadian studios have like individual, like a texture art position and a model position, for example, but Melbourne didn't. It's just you're a model and texture artist, and so I didn't have any modeling, I guess, on my portfolio because it was just textures, you know. So I said, look, you know, I'm happy to do an art test. Like, if you want to give me a bit of like a concept of something you want done, I'll model it and I'll send it back. And if you're happy, like, you know, we can keep talking. But I sort of pre-warn them that, you know, I don't have modeling isn't really a thing I do a lot of. So, you know, they were fine with that, which is great. I don't think usually they don't really do that too often. So they sent me over. I think I had to make like a grandfather's clock or something like that. So I did that, and they were happy with that. I think sort of met the minimum requirements or something. I don't know. But yeah, just had another interview after that, and then I got an offer, and then I went to Melbourne for just over a year.
Nice. And so, could you explain to me a bit more about the technical differences between the film and the game industry? Like, so let's just limit it to materials, because I sort of the modeling side of it, like, is kind of, I don't want to say obvious, but like you can wrap your head around it. Yeah. For me, as a materials artist, you know, so as a game set point of view, you know, we have the usual pipeline. You know, you 2K is really the textures we go up to, tessellation, do like shader work to like optimize and do crazy shit. So from that to film, what's like the differences you've noticed?
Well, I'll quickly touch on something about modeling. This is because this was my very first experience at Method. We're working on Aquaman, and I had to. I think my very very first experience was to make like this tile level cobblestone ground for one of the shots. But my first modeling experience was this. It was like this parapet thing that Mira runs across, and so I did this, and because I was really into game art and things like that, and as I said, like, film to me was a bit of an accident, and I didn't really, it was never on my radar to do anything in film, and so I'm modeling this parapet, and you know, I'm doing projections of some LiDAR scans we had in ZBrush, and then sort of, you know, making my high poly mesh, and I baked that down to this low poly mesh, and then I had displacement, and I had all this kind of stuff, and there was issues, like in review, there was issues you know, on the corners of this parapet where the displacement would sort of freak out, and so they're like, oh, like, how many polys is this? And I'm like, oh, it's about 8,000, which I still thought was pretty high, right? I said it's about 8,000, and they're like, just bump it up to like 2 million. I'm like, oh, okay, so I didn't even need displacement. It's just like, yeah, just bump it up. And so from that point on, like, that was film to me. It was like, there is limitations, but there's kind of not at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, you can go crazy and it's fine. From a texture side of things, like, I wouldn't work anything under 4K, and even 4K, like, that's 4K per UDIM. You know, you could have 20 UDIMs at 4K each or 8K each, and it's fine. Sometimes there's assets that, you know, are really shader heavy and things like that, and, you know, render times are just crazy, and so sometimes they might, you know, they'll say, oh, you know, you might not need that high res or something like that. Usually when it gets to the lighting artists there, if their render times are really long, they start like flipping out a bit, because you can imagine as a lighting artist trying to, you know, you change your lighting, then you have to render, change the lighting, render. So it's a bit of a pain. But other than that, I don't really think there's not too many limitations, I guess. I mean, you look at things like what's it called? Man, what was that movie with like those big titans?
Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim, that's the one. Yeah, sorry. So you look at those mechs, for example, and obviously they're hero assets, but I think they had like hundreds to maybe thousands of UDIMs at like these insane texture resolutions. And it's just what you got to do to get something, especially when something's close to camera. You know, you need that sort of detail. So, you know, it's not really frowned upon to have huge textures. And
yeah, you sort of make it look as good as possible, essentially. Like, you don't really care. It's like, make it look as good as possible. Like, basically, when I say within reason, it's basically without being a moron and making a, you know, a box 50 million polys if it doesn't need to be 50 million polys. But like, it's exactly the within reasons, basically not beyond stupidity. But when you're working like at that high res, so you're working at 4K and you know it's going to be on a bunch of UDIMs, do you approach the material or prop for that matter any differently? Like, do you, because, you know, so when you're doing like a material, you'll do like macro shapes and then on micro shapes, and then you'll sort of refine and warp and all this kind of stuff, and you go through these steps. Are you doing like, is there any extra steps you have to add in yourself to compensate for the fact that you are on these massive UDIMs?
Not really. I don't think so. Like, I feel there's a lot more sort of hand painting involved, because because really, like, I'm not I guess it depends. Like, if it's a hero asset, there is. If it's something that's sort of hardly seen or whatever, it's, you know, who cares? It's procedural, the whole thing. And I would say, like, a majority of my work was all just procedural textures, and the same sort of workflow applies. You do big shapes, medium to small shapes, and all that. But for like hero assets, there is a lot of hand painting. Like, even in John Wick, like the asphalt road I did, for example, there was a bit of hand painting on that, and it wasn't just all sort of
what was the reason for that?
Just because there's really specific requirements. So it's like, okay, we know this part of the road is really close to camera, so we want like some cracks and stuff painted on in there or things like that. So when we sort of know what has to look really good, that's when sort of hand painting comes in. And it goes, the same goes with everything really. Like in Men in Black, some of the work I did on that, you know, it was a lot of hand painting. And, you know, if I can get away with purely just using procedurals and like, you know, procedural masks and all that kind of stuff, then, you know, I will. But yeah, there is a lot of hand painting, and especially because a lot of meshes are really high poly as well. So to get completely procedural stuff thrown onto a really, really high poly mesh is a bit of a pain when you're trying to sort of, you know, get the right curvature of something in particular. then I'll just hand paint all that detail in. Yeah,
That's pretty cool, man. That's sick. So you've gone from like you've done film, you're now working for Quixel. Let's start with Quixel. What does a day job at Quixel entail? Because you obviously everyone knows it's Photoscans. That's what they sort of pride themselves on. As a text writer, what's your role? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I do a lot of marketing material. So there's a few things online that I've done. There's a couple of there's an environment up on we did a full breakdown of.
That seems sick, by the way. I really like that.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. So things like that. But even just marketing material for Mixer itself, which is my primary role. So things like the splash screen on Quixel Mixer, for example, I had to do, and if there's new features coming out and all that stuff, I've sort of got to create stuff using those new features, and generally just test out software, give feedback to the devs and things like that. But yeah, generally it's just make a bunch of cool stuff, which is really good.
Is it fair to call it R&D? Like, you basically, here's a tool, play with it and see what you can do with it, and where you get held up, tell us and we'll see if we can alleviate it.
Yeah, I guess at times I wouldn't say that's like the majority of what I do, but it definitely is a big part of it. We might have a stable build for a while, and I just got to make cool art, I guess. So there's not really much R&D involved in that. But when there's new features coming out, or they're sort of trying to revisit certain areas of their software or whatever, then I might be asked to sort of have a play and sort of report any bugs and do whatever I can to sort of help make it as good as possible, I guess. But yeah, I think majority of the time it's mainly just marketing, creating scenes, creating textures, which is it's a really sort of great opportunity that I've had. Yeah, man, like it's obviously there's deadlines and all that kind of stuff, but it's nothing like it was in film. It wasn't these just, I don't know, film was a bit ridiculous to be honest, but
no, I can imagine.
Yeah, so it's been really, really great. Yeah.
How hard is it to adjust? Like, because obviously before that, and actually you're one of the interesting artists because your stuff isn't it isn't only substance designer. You mix softwares together, which I think is quite an interesting idea anyway, because it's sort of, to me, it's a case of showing your understanding of the software where you're willing to go out of it and bring stuff in because you're aware of its limitations and stuff like this. So I found it quite interesting anyway. How was it adjusting being a substance designer guy though and moving over to Mixer? So just to preference it, when I've played with Mixer and Alchemist, I'm going to use them both at the same time because they both do similar things. Yeah, I find it very difficult to switch my head into that mode compared to. So I've basically struggled to stay in it. I end up going trying to do something, and I'm like, fuck it, I'm going into designer and I'll do it myself because I know how to do it that way.
Yeah.
How's that been?
Yeah,
like, moving across.
It's been interesting. Obviously, like I've had a lot more experience within substance tools before I joined Quixel, but I think it's really, really powerful. It did take a bit of adjusting, but it's mainly because I'm switching from a node-based piece of software to something that just has layer stacks. And so it's just sort of a different way of thinking about things and working out problems. And in Designer, for example, you can just move a bunch of nodes around, but in layer-based software, it's a little bit different. It's sort of it's a different way of thinking about things. But it's been really great. I think it's really, really, really powerful what they're doing. I don't know, man. Like it's don't know. It's I don't know. It's difficult.
Nah, I know it's putting on your spot a little bit. No, I think the thing I find weird is actually you might be able to answer this for me. I see a lot of mixer stuff, not you particularly, but like Victor, and I've seen a couple of other mixer users lean quite heavily on sci-fi. You know, the sci-fi elements, and now just the fact that you said layer stacks, I think it might have clicked in my own head anyway. But it seems like it's something that's quite powerful for that type of thing. That more, I don't want to call it architectural, but you know, structured type materials. And I don't know whether that's just because you know Victor's one of the main guys in terms of looking through mixer stuff. So, and I've just happened to have seen a lot of that. Is actually, I'm not going to ask that question. That's going to put you on the spot a bit too much.
All right.
But so with mixer. Yeah, you're using Photoscans. I've got an interesting question, and this one is putting you on the spot, so I do apologise. But I spoke to Josh Lynch briefly about it, and it's quite an interesting conversation which I've had a million times, and I've got different answers every time, so that's why I love talking about it. And I'm trying to figure the best way of saying this. Do you think like Photoscans and that level of procedural is going to be the be all and end all in the future, or do you think there's always going to be space for something like Designer? And the reason I ask is you see like the ZBrush materials, they're very few and far between at this point. They're almost like done for artistic validation rather than a production workflow. Because some designers have become, Designer or Mix or whichever, has become so powerful that it's like there's no point doing that anymore. It's much quicker and better to do it this way. Do you think Designer will become the ZBrush and Photoscans will become the new just go to majority of people do it that way? Because I've struggled to adapt to Photoscans. I'll be honest, I've struggled to adapt to it quite a lot. I'm just curious to just pick your brains as someone who is a sort of a materials artist and knows both software so powerfully. What's your sort of opinion on the future? Where's materials going?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, the one thing I'll say about Mixer is we're not just focused on 3D scans. Like we're incorporating proceduralism as well. So we're actually mixing the two to get more flexible materials. So you can make something custom with procedural height maps and normal maps, and then use elements from Photoscans, whether it's higher frequency noise or albedos and things like that. So we're actually mixing the two. We're not necessarily focusing on just mixing a bunch of scans together, which is really fast. Like, don't get me wrong, doing it that way is super, super fast. But a lot of people seem to think that, dealing with scans is cheating in a way. They're like, oh, you've already got these assets made, so why are you, there's no artistic value to that. But I disagree. I mean, if there's indies, even film studios, the deadlines are so tight that if you want to mix a bunch of scans together to get something that you want, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not cheating. It's not anything like that. And as I said, if you want something a bit more specific, you can still mix procedural work with it. And I sort of don't really see there's a lot of substance designer artists out there that I know of that will create height maps and all that, and their roughness maps and all that kind of stuff in Designer, but they'll scour through textures.com scans or megascan scans and grab albedo values from those to use to get really accurate results. And it's like, well,
that's for you're leveraging the Photoscan stuff. I can see that. So and to me it's like, well, instead of just manually sort of picking albedo values and sort of applying those to whatever mask you have in Designer, just use the whole albedo. So I don't know, I don't see Designer going anywhere.
for a while. It's sort of hard to say. Like I'm a texture artist first, so I see value in all sorts of ways of doing like I still find value in sculpting and ZBrush and doing textures that way. But I think that the understanding of using scans within texture art is a bit sort of lost on a lot of people.
I want to try and play devil's advocate, because it's like I see. So there's one side of it which, and I fight this a lot, is I think younger artists or less experienced artists think of using scans as cheating, and I do it myself. I like struggle to use foliage from like mega scans. I'm not a foliage artist, and I'm like, no, I should make everything myself. And it's like that. It's a stupid mindset. I know it is. And I see that a lot from like the sort of more inexperienced people who maybe haven't worked in an industry so much, so they don't understand the merit of, you just need to get the job done whichever way possible. But speaking about like the artistic merit of Photoscans, when you're mixing it, like I've seen people mix like sort of like say the albedo values, or like they have an initial like height from the scan, then they alter it in in the procedural software. The one thing I think is, so let's say dust. The dust CS:GO map you guys made. I was talking to, I can't remember if it was Chris Radsby or the ArtStation guys, about why you like work. When you browse ArtStation, what do you like? What is it that catches your eye? And the way I see Photoscans, and this is purely a personal opinion, is I find it hard to see the style, if that makes sense. Like, so let's say Battlefront, for example. You don't look at that for its style. You're looking for the beautiful vistas, this sort of the lighting that exaggerates the real life, makes it look beautiful. I find with Photoscans, it loses me in a sense of, you lose that sense of, like, I guess the only word I could use is style, and style is such just a bland word, but you know what I mean? Like Photoscans, real life. Unfortunately, I was thinking about this driving down the motorway today, because I was thinking about this exact conversation. I was driving down the motorway and I was like, God, real life's boring. I was on a grey motorway, it was raining, and I was just looking, I was just like, Jesus, it's dull. And luckily with game technology, we boost colours and we do stuff to make stuff look better. But it's like, it's almost, I feel like Photoscans takes a step closer to reality. And from a technical point of view, I look at it and go, damn, that's nearly real life. That's amazing. But the artist in me, it doesn't speak to, without sounding cheesy. Do you get what I mean?
I understand what you're saying. But I think that the flexibility is still there. Like, you don't, you have these realistic scans, but you can still use them to sort of create, just say you want to do a stylized environment, for example, you can still do that with scans. Like, you can do your procedural sort of, your procedural base layers and all that, and then use albedo values from scan data, or get your roughness information from scan data. You can still do that. So I think, and again, like I agree with, artists sort of getting into the industry. It might not be necessarily the best thing, like to an extent. I think they really should always focus on fundamentals of 3D art, no matter what. Fundamentals of texture art, and even to the point of sculpting in ZBrush to make it tileable and things like that. Like, I think it's a really, really good skill to have, and it makes you sort of understand different workflows better. So I don't necessarily think that someone who's their first week in the industry, like learning the industry, should sort of go in and just like use Photoscans for everything. But I still feel people who do use them in environments, and Dust 2 is a good example of that. Like, there's still so much artistic sort of freedom or thought that has to go into it. you're using scans and you're making things look real, but there's still a lot of material work and shader work and you know, planning out your scene, and the models and stuff aren't necessarily like they're very primitive models, right? Because you're using decals and all that kind of stuff. But there's still a lot of planning that goes into it. There's still a lot of artistic sort of there's still an artistic side to it. Like you know, whether it's shaders and materials, you know, going into Mixer and sort of mixing proceduralism with scan data and things like that. It's not necessarily just here's a scan, let's apply it to a mesh. You know what I mean?
So you think that's maybe where people are misconstrued in using scan data is, you know, is not you just take it and use it. Like they're maybe missing, because, you know, a lot, like myself included, it's sort of like you think of it as I'm going to grab this scan data and this scan data, I'm going to slap it in and I'm done. You think that maybe people are missing a trick in terms of to actually get the most out of it. It's you have to then use the scan data with the procedural elements to really push them.
Yeah, I think it can go both ways. Like, and some people really enjoy just using scan data, and that's fine. You know, a lot of people, especially more traditional texture artists and things, they'll always be like, well, you're not really doing anything. And, you know, that's fine. But I think, if you start really sort of, I guess, thinking outside the box a bit more and mixing proceduralism with photo scans and sort of really getting something custom to what you need, it's all possible. And I think that's really a good way to go. You
can follow that rabbit hole so far back. You know, the way you just said, where like, oh yeah, you're not really doing anything using scan data. God, you can follow that down like to, oh yeah, you're just doing 3D, like that's not the same as clay modeling. Oh, you're using digital painting, that's not the same as traditional painting. Oh, you're animating keyframes in, you know, Maya. Oh, that's not the same as stop motion. Like you can follow it. The technology evolves. So the argument of you're not really doing anything is just a lack of understanding, or a willingness not to accept the new stuff. What I'm interested though, do you think? So I was thinking about, like, I say this quite often actually now. The environment artist as a role is quite broad, and there's a lot of skills you could have and should have and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The role of a materials artist, currently 9 times out of 10 a materials artist is, you know, oh, you gotta know substance designer and you probably should know some shader work in an engine. And like, you know, I always say, like, I always think it's good to have an understanding of shaders if you're a materials artist. That's just a personal opinion. I think it's good to understand how you're going to implement the stuff you make. Can you see in the next 5 years sort of being able to create photo scans becoming part of that sort of group of skills that is, I don't want to say required, but, you know, like there's certain things that are of merit to have. So, for example, if I'm an environment artist, if I have experience in understanding lighting and materials, along with obviously making props, sort of it's a big feather in the cap for, you know, pursuing a role. Do you think in the next 5 years, photo scans is going to come into that sort of category of a key skill from a materials artist?
Possibly. I think it might sort of depend on what industry you're in, maybe maybe not, but you know, like even at Method we have a bunch of, like, there was a department that just processes scans, for example, because we will get scans from the client and then, you know, they'll process them through reality capture and, you know, sort of do quick remeshes and UVs and all that kind of stuff. And that was almost pretty much its own department. So in a way, it's sort of already a thing. But I don't know, like, I don't think it would necessarily be a requirement, but I think it'll be a really, really strong skill to have. You look at things like The Lion King, for example, and, well, actually Disney in general, I think, are now sort of, everything has to be real to them. You know, they want this photo real everything, even these child cartoons that, you know, we grew up on. They want these photo real sort of things.
That hurts, man. It hurts so bad.
It does. But the reality is people still need to do that work. And if that's sort of the way things are heading, I like even Sonic, for example, you know, they want this photoreal thing. And so that's sort of where a lot of film studios are going. You know, they want all this realism. And so Lion King, for example, used a lot of scan data.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of scan data. And I believe they used a ton of megascans. So yeah, I think it's becoming more and more sort of prevalent.
I think if ray tracing carries on, and really, you know, digs itself into the industry and progresses and becomes more accessible to, like, you know, lower spec hardware and consoles. Because when I remember so PBR and like Photoscans, like true PBR, can look, I feel like, a bit janky sometimes. The metals can look kind of weird, but it's sort of, it's PBR, so you stick to it. And I can never put my finger on what it was until Victor's the Silent Hill demo at the bathroom, and it's a drain pipe on the floor, and before it was black. It was like a black color, because that's just what happens to metals in true PBR. And then it turned ray tracing on, and I was like, holy shit, that's what metal looks like. So I can see photoscans actually probably becoming more prevalent as ray tracing becomes more prevalent, because I do feel like in the simple PBR workflow, metals still look a little bit weird to me when it's properly true PBR, unless you're in the perfect light setup. But after seeing ray tracing, it bumped it up, and I was like, damn, that just looks good, full stop.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, there's obviously, as you say, like once ray tracing was turned on, that scene metals look really good, and I guess that's also because, you know, the rendering in real time at the moment, it's, you know, you're still using screen space reflections and things like that, so something will always feel a little bit off about so I think once sort of ray tracing catches on, you'll see obviously a lot more sort of realism and things like that. So I don't know, like I think scans sort of really catching on, especially, like, obviously I can't really speak to game studios. I know there's a lot of game studios that use you know, photo scans and things like that, but
like DICE, for example,
a lot of it sort of comes down to time, really, like time and money. And if you can bust out, you know, this realistic thing really quickly using scans, and if you need something specific, then, you know, mixing it with proceduralism and things like that, why not? I don't know.
Unfortunately, I think it'll always come down to that. It'll always come down to the money, the time versus money.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if people can't tell, like, you know, it's easy to look at a scene and go, oh, he just used photo scans. But if you can't tell, like, if you can't go, oh, I know what asset that is, and I know what asset that is. If you can't, like, specifically point out what assets are used, I think you've done a good job at using scans, right? Because, you know, obviously if every movie and every game you saw the same assets and you go, oh god, this again, obviously that's not too good, because there's really no artistic value to that or whatever. But if you're using them in a way where you can't tell, then why not, you know?
Yeah, you achieved your task. You have a task, you've achieved it.
Yeah.
How you got there is almost irrelevant. You're thinking about the end product at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think with Star Wars used tons of photo scans.
Well, I think Battlefront, you know, I think about Star Wars, although the game I didn't purchase and play because of the whole loot box fiasco, whatever. That's in the past. But the game looks fucking incredible. Like, it's one of the things. It's a type of game which I just sat back and looked at and went, it's just as a technical piece, and that's not to like devalue. That's not devaluing it whatsoever. But you look at it and you just go, it's almost real. And that's sort of that technical part of me which goes, that's so cool because it's so close to reality. That's what you would talk about as a kid when you're growing up. Is like, can you imagine a day where like you can't tell between games and real life? And it's like, well, some shots in Battlefront, it comes close. Like there's sometimes where you could make the mistake.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean they I guess going back to, having the ability to do photo scanning, as a skill, like they had their own teams for that, right? And
yeah,
same with Far Cry, like the most recent Far Cry, I think a few before that as well. But they had their own guys go out to, was it Minnesota or wherever one of them was shot, and photo scan a bunch of surfaces, like heaps of surfaces, and then process them, and then they throw them in. So is that artistic? Like, is it art to be able to go out and do all these photo scans and then process them and then make them good enough for a video game or film or something like that? Is that different to just buying scans off a marketplace? Like, it's there's a lot of sort of factors.
I think it's hard because it's one. I think art's a very subjective term, but because, like I said, we go back to the whole, like, there's probably people who sculpt materials who see substance design materials and go, that's not art. You're not actually doing any of that. And there's digital painters out there who probably get crit from, traditional painters saying, that's not. You're not even having to mix colors. That's not the same as art.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I do. When you say it's the way you described it, is it art to go out and scan a material and then bring it back and make it look game ready? I see that as, it is art, but it's a technical side of art, because I don't see substance design as art. I see that as, that's just technical art to me. I'm not expressing, I'm thinking. And
I agree
cheesy.
with that. I agree. I think, if anything, like artists will sort of need a bit more of a technical background to things, because I guess you look at how you make surfaces in Designer, for example. You sort of need to know how certain surfaces react and how they're built up. Like it's not like, here's a table, like let's recreate the surface of that table. It's okay, so there's the base sort of base texture, and then it's got coffee stains on it, like it's got smudges from where people have wiped it down, it's got this, it's got that. So you sort of got to know, I guess.
I suppose you also got to make a. I suppose there's something to be said there, which is there's no devalue in the fact that, like, talking about that, what I said earlier about the expressing versus, like, thinking. Yeah. It might be artists being artists and being the sort of cliche type people we tend to be. There's no less value in doing something that's technical and well thought out and a really clever solution to a problem versus being able to express and sculpt this amazing thing. Like, one isn't more valuable than the other. And I do think at the moment there is a lean towards saying, but it's just procedural, or like, and I class Designer in the same as this. There's a lean towards, it's just, technical, it's not art, or like it's devalued in some way, which is kind of frustrating. And although I do hold, like, the Photoscan stuff to it a little bit, I hold it more towards, I just see a less of an expressive type of art and more as of a thinker's type of art. It's far more clinical. But that's not but the thing is that that's not to say that's a bad thing. It's just, that's the way I see it, is it's not as expressive or clinical as, say, a painting. And I know that's like a really black and white example, but maybe the issue isn't so much of people going like, Photoscans is cheating because it's not even you doing it. It's just, there's a difference, there's a very distinct difference, but it doesn't lose its value because of that difference.
I agree. Like, there's been experiences in film, like, as I said, sometimes do a lot of hand painting and projection painting and things like that, and there's a cutoff where proceduralism ends and then sort of photoreal hand painting begins. And for that kind of stuff, you might use projection painting and projecting from photos. We could literally get textures from textures.com and project that onto a model and then sort of clean it up and, get rid of lighting or whatever. I guess even that, like that's another thing. Like projection painting photos, is that cheating? Because it's used all the time, especially in film. So it's like I think they all have their own sort of merit.
I think just ditch the idea of cheating, man. Like substance painter, is that cheating? Because you're painting procedural stuff on. You can paint your normal maps in, so you don't even need a high poly. Is that cheating?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, we go to substance designer. Well, you haven't even sculpted that detail. Like, is that cheating? And then you go to like,
exactly.
It's not cheating. It's just like it's kind of this weird thing we are in though. Like, our job is our passion, and like, you're sort of balancing the fact that it's a job and a business, and time is money, versus you expressing yourself as an artist. And people, I think, get them conflated sometimes. Like,
totally.
If you're in a film studio, you get the best results you possibly can, the quickest time possible. There's no room for your artistic self to block being efficient, and I do think that gets conflated sometimes, especially with the tools you make. I mean, you work for Quixel. The whole point of Quixel is to speed up production. That it's not it's not a tool to. It's same for ZBrush. ZBrush isn't a tool for you to sit and express yourself. Fundamentally, it was made to speed up the process of production. And I think that sometimes it gets conflated. One thing one thing that isn't procedural, and I need to know, who comes up with them Quixel puns? I need to know, because there's a special place in my heart for that person.
I was thinking about this yesterday. Like, I thought that's gonna come up in this podcast for sure. I'm not 100% sure who actually comes up with them. Like, obviously, there's a marketing team and all that, so they come up with it, I guess. I don't know if there's like one specific person, but yeah, they're great, right? Like, everyone.
That's a highlight of my day when a new poster comes out. I don't care what it is. I just want to see the pun.
Yeah, everyone I speak to, who makes those puns?
God, they're genius, dude. Like, because there's the best ones are the ones where I see the asset, I see the pun, and straight away I'm like, oh, is that a good one? I don't get it. And then it clicks, and I'm like, holy shit, this person's like next level Jedi genius. Yeah.
And then some are like, I think I've seen one. I can't remember. It's like borderline sort of. Ooh, I don't know if you should be using that.
I think I know which one you're on about, dude. So, interesting question for you, actually, because you're a dude who's seen a lot. You've been in a lot of different industries. You've experienced a lot. If you go back to you as a sort of 17, 18-year-old, first thinking about this industry in the college, is there anything you'd say to him?
Well, I'm glad you think I'm that young, because I didn't start this industry until like 4 years ago, I think.
Really?
Yeah. I started college in 2015, and I finished in 2017.
So you're a prodigy. You're like next level crazy.
Mate, I don't think, as I said, got lucky.
Go on then. 5 years ago, what would you say? You first started college. What would you say to yourself?
Yeah, like, keep working hard, like, because to me it was sort of, I had to do that, I had to sort of get a job at a studio, and obviously I wanted to be a game studio, but that didn't really happen, and mainly because the industry here in Australia is not like great for games, I would say. And flying someone out from Australia for a junior position, on the other side of the world isn't really feasible, I don't think. So to me it was like, outside of school hours, work hard on your craft, sort of thing. And I think that's really the only sort of advice I would give myself, is to really just keep working hard. And yeah, I don't know. It's
no, that's fair enough. Sometimes there's not a crazy man you would say to yourself, especially like I said, you had to grind pretty hard for it, and you're in a particular circumstance which is no fault of your own. Being aware of your situation, that's a high level of self-awareness right there.
Yeah, and like I started late as well. Like I'm 30, and so I was 26 or something when I sort of started. And that's another thing. A lot of people sort of, I see a lot of people say, like, for example, when Quixel, for example, might post a job ad, share it around on Facebook and things like that, and I see people every now and then going, "Oh, I'm 35, too old." It's like, don't think that way. Like, don't think about your age. Think about your art and like your skill set and things like that. And I went to college with late 30 to early 40-year-old who were literally just getting into it as well, and they sort of felt the same thing. Like, oh, is this a bit too old and stuff like that? And no, it's not. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I will say that if I could talk to 18-year-old me, it would be get into this, like, really sort of, because I think I wouldn't say it's a regret, but one thing I sort of wish I had have done is get into this earlier, because like I love it, right? And I am getting into it a little bit later than most people, and so I haven't really like, I would have like, what's that, 20, I would have like 10 years experience under my belt.
Yeah, but no, there's a thing to be said for that though, because I'm very glad before I got into game art, I worked normal jobs. I was a labourer, I was a brickie, I worked in catering. My creative director didn't land his first art job until he was like 25, 26. He worked in a cinema, and there's a certain amount, and I'm not sort of hating on uni students. I've worked with people who have had to work very hard to get where they are, because they've gone a long road round and they've gained a bit of mileage on the clock in terms of life experience, versus people straight out of uni who have gone like education, job. And there is something to be said for people who have that life experience. There's an appreciation. Like I said, you've worked over jobs. Like, I every day count my blessings that I do art, because I refused to ever go back to being a brickie. I hated it. I think there's a certain, so like, it's not necessarily negative, man, because I think there's a lot of character to be said for someone who has lived a life outside of art, because you are in a bit of a bubble, I find, this industry. You've got a very particular type of friends when you talk to artists regularly. We're a very inclusive group, very supportive group. I think to have that outside life experience, you're a bit more down to earth, I find.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And like, I'm the same. Like, I've had a couple of labour jobs. I started off as like a computer technician. Like, I dropped out of school, went to college for a year, got a degree for network engineering, became a technician. I was a technician for a while, and I was a labourer. And then I ran a business as a web developer and a programmer for like 7 years or something. Damn. And then I just got sick of all that. Like, I was like, man, I'm just like changing jobs, and working for myself back then was good at the time, but I sort of started getting older, and like, I'm constantly having to work long hours while searching for more work so I can pay rent 1 month and things like that. So I just got over all of that. And I sort of thought, this art thing, at the time I didn't really think there was much in it. Like, for me, at least in Australia, like, I didn't think of it as a career. Like, I never thought that it could be a thing, because I just never thought about it. But it was always something I was sort of like, I would dabble around in Unreal or Unity in my spare time, not really knowing what I was doing, but it was still interesting to me. But I didn't think it was, going to be, that could be a career. And then I came across the college I went to, and I thought, well, now's the time to sort of just take 2 years off work. I had my partner at the time who was supportive of that. So, I took 2 years off everything and just went to studying 2 years full time, just working on sort of improving myself to sort of hopefully get a job at the end. I think that was the scary thing too, is like, there's no guarantee you're going to get a job. There's really, really talented artists out there that still don't have a job at a studio. And people like I look at and go, they're really good artists, like better than me, and they don't have a job at a studio. I'm thinking, I really got lucky. I think there's a little bit of luck. It's a bit of good timing and things like that. Obviously you don't want to apply for jobs when a bunch of people are getting fired and things like that. So I think a lot comes into it, but for me it was a bit of a risk. But as I got more and more into it, and I studied harder and harder, I was sort of determined, like this is it. Like if I don't do this, then what? Like I'm just gonna become a labourer or something like that. I don't want that. Yeah. So I was pretty determined. So yeah, I don't know. It's
I think there's going to be there's going to be a very particular group of people who are hearing Aquaman from you and your sort of journey into it. It's going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah, hopefully.
Because like I said, but the majority of people think of it as college, uni, or college, uni, junior, whatever, and you go through the ranks.
Yeah.
The fact that people see people like yourself who have gone strength to strength, who went this other route, it's going to be I think very empowering for some people. And that's not me being like wishy-washy or anything like that. It's I genuinely think people being aware of there are other routes is very, very important, especially in this day and age, especially in the day and age where traditional education isn't necessarily the only route or the best route these days.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I think the other thing is too, like once I sort of finished college, by then I made a lot of connections, people like Josh Lynch and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of people were like, you don't really need a degree. And so then once I did that, I was like, well, why did I do that? But I don't know, I still think even though you don't need a degree to get a job in the industry, for me personally, it was a really good sort of a good way to get on that path, because I didn't know how to model, I didn't know how to do anything. And so for me, especially at the age I was, I think it was a really good sort of way in to learn that.
I've had to open my eyes up a little bit more, speaking to more people, because I didn't go to university. I don't have a degree, and I used to be pure like. As I say, it's cool, mate. You live with birds. That's sick. So I have this I had this mindset of you don't need university, sod that, it's a waste of time, waste of money, go do this. Speaking to people who have gone uni, there are benefits, which I'm not aware of or wasn't aware of, and also I suppose it requires a bit of empathy from myself, because not everybody has the same sort of mindset as me. Some people, like I said, don't even know where to start, so they need that sort of first step to help them figure out what to do. I'm starting to realise there are benefits, although I do still sit on this fence outside of, if I had to choose, if I go back to being like a 17-year-old and I could choose, I would 100% choose self-taught and do mentorships. But I am seeing the benefits for certain people for the university route.
Totally. And that's another good point. Like I'm seeing, a lot of people doing mentorships now, which I didn't really take notice of, 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't really see, I saw maybe CGMA and things like that, but there's a lot of individuals doing mentorships now. And I think that is also really, really, really awesome to see. And it's also, that's another route that someone can take, as you said, just do mentorships instead of going to college and racking up $50,000 student debt. I think that's viable completely. I don't know. It's I had good experience and then I had bad experiences with college.
We should have everything.
Exactly. So it's all I don't know. It's how you sort of interpret it, I guess, when you go. I don't know.
Yeah, right, dude. we're gonna have to wrap up. I really enjoyed talking to you, man. It's been cool talking to like a materials guy such as yourself. Like, you know, you have insight and appreciation for like every side of the spectrum in terms of, you know, material art as a discipline. So I've really enjoyed talking to you about this, man. And I appreciate you coming on, because I know this has been, you're a bit, you know, you've had to go out your way in order to come on. So yeah, I tip my hat to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for 11 o'clock there now.
Yep, just coming up to 11 o'clock, but that's good. It's good.
Thanks for that.
So everyone who's listening, please remember to like the video, share it, follow, subscribe, whichever platform you're listening on. Helping, you know, raise the profile of the podcast, you know, helps more people hear the great information people such as James is spreading. You know, this is all stuff people could really benefit from. But we're gonna wrap up. James, thanks so much for coming on, man, and I look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's been great.
Peace out, guys.